they have this indigenized sort of manufacturing of renewable energy, and they can not only transfer the technology but also the diffusion of information that is really necessary for the global south countries, so that not the global south countries, they are not only demanding the financing flowing from the global north to global south in terms of mitigation efforts. As you rightly mentioned, Zainab, that there is a 300 billion per year pledge of climate financing. Still, however, it is short of the target, but still, these monies, they can help in developing these sort of roadmaps. But still, we need to look for that Baku to Belém pathway or roadmap towards 1.3 trillion goal. That would really help. But in parallel, what we need is we need technology transfer plus the information diffusion, so that there is more indigenized, more human-grown, homegrown agenda, particularly for developing countries, based on the best practices that have been followed by global north in terms of mitigation. So let me now converge back to the Pakistan. Pakistan now has an economic case for phasing out these fossil fuels because we are in capacity trap. Yes, we installed so many coal power plants because we needed those plants for the accessibility reason. But now that accessibility crisis over, there is another crisis because of those installed power plants, and these plants are underutilized. The demand is declining in Pakistan, and now we are in another crisis, that is affordability crisis. And the solution to that affordability crisis, that we are planning on transforming imported coal plants to local coal plants, maybe that will bring us to another crisis in the future, and that would be a sustainability crisis. Why I am saying this, there would be a sustainability crisis because there is an initiative led by the European Union coming that targets the trade in terms of making it a climate smart trade, and that is CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which means that if there is a manufacturing, particularly manufacturing from export oriented companies, industries, which are using more carbon intensive electricity from the grid, their commodities would not be as much as export competitive if you are manufacturing them with renewable energy. Turkey, in their latest report of BTR, they showed the figure of 9% decline in their iron and steel to EU because of the CBAM, and around 20% decline in their cement exports if they do not pursue these mitigation efforts. So Pakistan need to start now. There are many initiatives, for example, Just Energy Transition Partnerships, Asian Development Bank's Energy Transition Mechanism, and a very nonce and new type of market-based solution involving carbon credits, that is Coal to Clean Credit Initiative. Another thing that was agreed upon in COP29 was the negotiations on Article 6, particularly the Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement, which allows the countries on voluntarily basis to trade the ITMOs. That means that now NDCs are a tradable commodity, which means that if Switzerland, just for example, if Switzerland has a deficit in achieving their NDC targets by this much, and Pakistan has the surplus, they can both trade their deficits and surplus. So there is an economic case for that as well. So if Pakistan is planning on utilizing these JETPs or ETMs or CCCI initiatives, there are financing available. But what we need to discuss, and what I would want as an energy economist from these very expert panelists, that how can we develop these plans in terms of more integrated plans, more inclusive plans, and having this economic feasibility of these plans. So looking forward to discussion on how to sort of not only phase out these fossil fuels on environmental grounds, but also how to make an economic case of it, and how to bring more climate finance to Pakistan, and how to sort of make it as a part of macroeconomic planning of Pakistan, and be part of a solution in terms of solving Pakistan's power sector crisis. That is mainly how to make it accessible, how to make it affordable, reliable, and also sustainable for our exports to grow. So looking forward to it. Thank you so much. I see so many experts. Dr. Majid is here, Basit, Majid, Dr. Majid from NERST is here, Shakib Saab is here, Selena, Afia, Irfan Saab. I will be getting in touch with you as well, and Julia. Thank you so much. So looking forward to this expert discussion. Back to you, Zainab.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khalid, for your wonderful insights and setting the stage for today's discussion. I believe you've rightly mentioned that phasing out of fossil fuels makes economic sense in case of Pakistan and in case of other developing countries. I think with this stage setting, and I would like to move towards our presentation. We'll be discussing the findings of our latest report in this presentation. We'll also be discussing the overall case of coal transition in Pakistan. I'll be taking your 15 to 20 minutes, so bear with me for that. Okay, so let me just quickly share my screen. Okay, so is my screen visible?
Yes, Zainab, it's visible.
Okay, so perfect. Okay, so we'll begin with the overview of the energy sector in Pakistan. The energy sector in Pakistan, basically the energy mix is heavily reliant on the fossil fuels. And if we see in fossil fuels, the major fuels are RLNG and coal. Also, in the recent scenario, the utilization rates of imported coal has dropped because of the economic crunch, as Dr. Khalid have mentioned earlier, that there is a situation of capacity trap, which we will be discussing further in our next slides. Also, in Pakistan, there is the coal moratorium, but in the existing situation, the government is building the already committed coal plants and is planning to convert the imported coal power plants to thermal coal. If we see the situation in Pakistan, we are facing a multifaceted crisis of three E's. The three E's are basically energy, economy, and environment, and these are strongly interlinked. The interlinked nature of these sectors make it a bit more complex situation for the overall sector, but addressing one of the challenges in any one of these sectors would be enough to address the overall situation of the country. Also, the compounding effect that is being added to these challenges is through the Pakistan's position in the vulnerability index. Pakistan ranks at the 8th most vulnerable country in the global index. And if we see every year, the impacts of climate change are worsening. If we recall the 2022 floods, almost 30 million people were affected by this, and $30 billion of financial loss was incurred in that. And if we look at the current scenario of coal power plants in Pakistan, we basically have an installed capacity of 3,960 megawatts and 2,640 megawatts of capacity from the local power plants. This trend shows basically that 60% of the capacity depends upon imported coal. And so basically, what are the challenges when imported coal? One of the major challenges with imported coal is the price volatility. Price volatility because imported coal is, viable to the external shocks. Whenever there is an external shock like the Russia-Ukraine conflict or any other disruptions like pandemic or anything, that shock effect trickles down to Pakistan. So there is also one of the major challenge in the coal with the capacity of coal-fired power plants, that is the capacity payments. As we all know that the power purchase agreements in Pakistan are indexed against dollars. So whenever there is rupee depreciation, we see an impact of increase in the capacity payments. For example, in 2023, the overall capacity charges were 1082 billion. But with a rupee depreciation, the charges rose to 2512 billion, which is almost a 145% increase. And if we see the payments of Chinese finance plants and the local finance plants, the payments rose 145% for the Chinese finance plants and 60% for the local funded coal power plants. And now if we move toward the overall capacity payments in the energy sector, we can here see that the highest of the charges are coming from the imported and local coal. Also, if we look at the capacity payments per plant, the highest capacity payments are range from 77 billion to the lowest of 7.4 billion. If we analyze the emissions, total emissions coming from the coal power plants, here we can see that 3.9 million tons of emissions are coming from thermal coal and 0.6 million tons of emissions are coming from the Thalnova power plant. Also, here we can see the utilization rates of each power plant. The utilization rate of Port Qasim is 27% and the Sahiwal imported coal is 51%. These are the numbers from the last year. The current numbers are quite below these, and it's not for the Port Qasim and Sahiwal. The overall utilization rates have dropped significantly. Also, one of the major challenge and issue with the coal power plants in Pakistan is that our coal fleet is quite young. The average age of our power plants is from 5 to 7 years. So to retire these power plants, what we can do is that we cannot retire them immediately as we have remaining purchasing agreements signed. There's also a case of this that we have to, so there are certain debt profiles, debt remaining debt that needs to be paid off, which we will be discussing in next slides as well. So this is basically the debt profile of each coal power plant. Here we can see that the Sahiwal coal power has a remaining debt of 179 million, which will be paid off in 4 years. Whereas the China Hub's remaining principal is 329 million, and it will take at least 5 years to repay the debt. And if we see the case of Thalnova, it's $312.56 million, which will take about 9 years to repay. And if we see at the block 2, the remaining amount is 171.61 million, which will take 5 years. I would like to highlight one point here that in the current situation, the number of years will be a bit greater because this is the data from 2023. In the current years, the debts are not going as per schedule, so this years could be increased a bit further. Like instead of 4 years, the debt could take 5 to 6 years in the next. Also, if we look at the remaining principal of block 1, $600 million for 5 years, and that will be 3 years. And look at the remaining principal of Lucky power plants, that is 537.7 million years. And if we talk about Third Energy Limit, that's remaining principal is $279.5 million, and it will take a time period of about 8 years for debt to be repaid. Okay, so study. What we have basically done is that ADB and Asian have done a feasibility analysis for their energy transition mechanism. And what SDPI has done, we have a shadow pre-feasibility study by using the following variables. The 4 categories of variable that we used in our analysis are the financial we use the data involvement analysis methodology. Based on this methodology, what we try to see is that make an orderly plan for retirement of coal power plants. As per the analysis, we can see here that the top priority for early retirement is Sahiwal imported coal, which you can see here on the graph as well. So as we all know that considering the economic situation of Pakistan, it won't be possible to retire coal power plants without any financial mechanism or without any support from international community. So for what mechanisms we have, we'll be discussing them as well. So the possible avenues of early coal retirement are the JET-P model, Just Energy Transition Partnership, the Energy Transition Mechanism, and the Coal to Clean Credit Initiative, and the Coal Transition Accelerator Program. So how these mechanisms can facilitate the overall coal retirement situation? We see that JECPs is basically financial and technical support, and it's basically from and the just transition. And if we talk about the ETM, EDM is an ADB-led initiative that is used to retire underutilized and inefficient coal plants. It redirects investments into clean energy without impacting energy security. And if we talk about the Coal Transition Accelerator, it's a global initiative that was basically launched at COP26, and it aims to reduce the capital costs and unlock financing. It bridges public-private investments and for renewable energy projects. It also promotes structured solution for coal phase out in developing or developed countries. And then we'll talk about the Coal to Green Credit Initiative. It basically incentivizes a just transition to coal clean energy using the carbon finance. It focuses on reskilling workers and creating jobs for coal-reliant communities, and it supports livelihood protection and equitable development of the communities. This is our report. If you would like to read any further about the topics or about the points that we discussed earlier, you can go through to our website and access this report, or you scan this QR code and go through our report. So as I've mentioned earlier in my previous slides, that the government of Pakistan was basically planning to shift from imported coal to indigenous coal. But there are certain issues with the shifting in that transition as well, because you see, let's move to the next slide first. So you see basically the government wants to shift to indigenous coal because they are of the view that indigenous coal is a cheap and affordable source for power generation. But the reality is a bit different if we go into the details. Firstly, the indigenous coal is basically comprised of lignite, which is have high pollution content in that, and also the production efficiency is comparatively low than the imported coal. Also, there are certain costs, operations and management costs, and the equity and interest numbers that basically ends in making the local coal comparatively higher cost, make it expensive than the local coal. If we see here in the graphs, the capacity charges of Chinese power plants that basically runs on imported coals this is capacity charges of Chinese power plants is quite similar to the capacity charges of local plants. There is no significant difference here, but if instead there is almost a little bit of increase in the capacity charges of local plants. So here the issue is not that imported coal or local coal. The main issue is the utilization of power plants and the decreasing demand in the overall Pakistan. Also, there are some other issues in utilizing the indigenous coal. If we opt for indigenous coal, we have to increase the coal mining operations, and this have certain risks and environmental concerns. If we go further into that, there are some security risks in coal mining regions, such as if we see Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa face insurgencies, land disputes, and militant attacks. The Mutch region in Balochistan incident highlights vulnerability of miners and infrastructure, and the coal mining can disrupt coal supply chains. Also, there are certain socioeconomic implications of coal mining. To describe these indicators of coal mining, we can see the case of Thal coal. The Thar coal and livelihood disruptions in Thar. Basically, the coal development in Thar has displaced over 30,000 people from 10 villages, and it disrupted their traditional livelihoods like farming and livestock grazing. If we see at the policy and governance issues, land acquisition issue is the prominent issue in those areas and local communities. And basically, these land acquisition lacks a clear policy with arbitrary decisions. And there are delays in compensation and exclusion of affected communities from key information. Also, there is an inadequate compensation with no provision for loss of leased or grazing land, and inadequate funds for lost assets such as the trees and animal pen. There's also loss of livelihood for livestock communities, and there are landless farmers, and there's lack of jobs as well. Landless farmers are left without adequate compensation and job opportunities. There are promises of employment in coal projects that offer favor outsiders and that leaves local communities further marginalized. There are also some coal externalities associated with the process of utilizing using coal in power plants, which is often not reflected in our pricing mechanism. If we see that the tariff setting mechanism for coal do not account for the external costs, the indirect costs borne by the society and the environment rather than the producers or consumers. These externalities include the health impacts and environmental damage. Coal combustion releases significant greenhouse gases contributing to climate change. It also leads to air, water, and land pollution. Also, there is a significant challenge of water degradation. Coal mining, uh, coal mining and plant operations often pollute nearby water sources. Also, the social cost of carbon, a well-established figure that measures the economic impact of carbon emission, is not factored into the coal pricing structure. This means that the true cost of coal energy when accounting the environmental and social damages is not reflected in the pricing of consumers or the cost of the producers. So what we are trying to is we are not saying to shift from imported coal to local coal. We suggest to transition from coal to clean. As we have seen that the case of Pakistan, the situation in Pakistan is that we are always lagging behind and following the trends. As we see the situation in Pakistan, when the whole when the whole world was using coal for their industrialization and power generation, Pakistan was not opting for coal. Pakistan has recently, like 10 years ago, have opted for coal for natural for the consumption for production of electricity and for industrial purposes. So we were late in the game, but when we shifted to coal, the world was transitioning away from coal. So our strategy for at this time should not be to lag behind. As the world is transitioning towards renewable, Pakistan should also transition towards renewables, as renewables is also nowadays an economically viable option. So if we see the merits of transitioning away from coal is the environmental benefits, economic advantages, health improvements, and energy security. So what are the enablers for transitioning away from coal? There are global commitments that can enable this transition or facilitate the transition. There are we have Pakistan is endowed with abundant renewable energy resources. So we can use local resources to reduce reliance on costly imports and fossil fuels. And there are technological advancements, falling costs, and improved efficiency of solar panels, wind turbines, and energy storage systems. And also these innovations can address the intermittency challenges and lower energy generation costs. Then there are government policies and incentives such as the alternative and renewable energy policy that provides feed-in tariffs, tax credits, and incentives for investors. And there are certain provincial programs like the Punjab Green Development Program that promote renewable adoption. Rising public awareness. Also, there is a growing understanding of coal's environmental and health risks and increasing uptake of distributed solar. The recent case of solar boom in Pakistan is basically showing the public's interest towards solar and renewable. Also, what would be the barriers to transition away from coal if we discuss that? There are certain infrastructure limitations such as the inadequate grid capacity for large-scale renewable energy integration, and also at present, our national grid supports 15% of RE integration in that. Also, there are certain and major financial constraints such as the high upfront cost for renewable and limited access to affordable financing and subsidies. And there are policy and regulatory uncertainties, inconsistent government policies, and delays in approvals. And also there are it affects nearly 40% of renewable energies. Also, there are some technological and innovation gaps, such as limited access to advanced renewable technologies due to outdated systems and barriers. 20% of the projects use cutting-edge solutions. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there are some land acquisition challenges. So, to address all these issues, what we recommend is that the government of Pakistan should collaborate with Chinese coal plant owners and other relevant Chinese and Pakistani stakeholders and involve the Chinese government as well to devise a medium to long-term strategy for an orderly retirement of coal power plants. Here, the involvement of China is very important because majorly all the Chinese power plants in Pakistan are built under CPEC. So it's one of the critical recommendation that needs to be adopted by the government. Also, the renegotiation of power purchase agreements. We need to restructure the PPAs to address the rising issue of capacity trap and circular debt, and we need to build some incentive mechanisms for coal to renewable transition. We also need to establish just energy transition partnerships for to accelerate the renewable energy adoption through financial and technical support, and we should partner with G7 countries and the private sector to accelerate this transition. Also, a phased orderly retirement of coal-fired plants is critical. If we take, I would show here the example of London recently have phased out their coal power plants completely. Financially, the economic conditions are quite different for London and for UK and for Pakistan. But if we see that they have made a long-term plan. They did not plan that they will be phasing out the coal power plant in next year or the year after. What the plan was, they made a 10-year strategic plan. And what Pakistan needs is also to make a 10-year strategic plan and involve international financing institutions and development partners in that plan to make a phased and orderly retirement plan for Pakistan. Also, the mechanisms like jet fees, ETMs, and carbon pricing are very crucial for this transition. And we need just and equitable transition. So we need to focus on reskilling workers to create jobs, green jobs. And we also need a proper capacity building program to facilitate this transition so that the communities that are involved in coal should not be, marginalized or should not be impacted by this transition. Also, we have a number of opportunities in the renewable energy sector. We need to explore them and build public-private partnerships and build some international cooperation to drive this transition. So with this, thank you for your time and hearing. And I'll now move towards, just a second, let me stop sharing that. Okay. So with this, I will start the roundtable discussion. Ubaid is here. Ubaid will be co-moderating the session with me today.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Zainab, and previously Dr. Khalid for taking the lead, setting the scene. I mean, the whole idea behind the whole discussion, which Zainab has put the study with the team STPI has done, is basically that. I mean, we really need to understand. We'll definitely be discussing the COP team, but we really need to understand that in many of the developing countries, particularly for Pakistan's and the way its economics are, coal is strongly portrayed to be an economically viable solution when you sort of compare it to the renewables. Because again, I mean, the numbers have changed, the capacity payments have changed, and there's now, I mean, with the whole solar rush, I believe the speakers will be talking about it a bit later, but with the whole solar rush happening, there is actually an economic case for transitioning away from coal in Pakistan. So that's something that's really there. But we'll definitely, then as we move along, we'll go through two sort of dimensions. One is exactly how we take the discussions that happened at COP29. And again, very pleased to have with us Ms. Julia from Powering Past Goal Lines. We'll be taking her first very shortly. But apart from that, today we have our experts taking from the academia, the grassroots movements, the think tanks, and the private sector entities that are sort of conducting a lot of research around this. We have some subject experts, and lastly, we're very pleased to have with us a representative from the Private Power Infrastructure Board, which comes under the Ministry of Energy Power Division. But yes, again, but just before, Julia, before coming, we'll just take a couple of minutes. I believe the point is that, I mean, the COP28 set a very good scene when you mentioned the transition away from the fossil fuels. But as we went into COP29, the debate, the discussions that happened around the fossil fuels, particularly coal, again, on natural gas, that remained limited. We couldn't actually carry the momentum that sort of started for transition from fossil fuels at COP28 to COP29. Pakistan, although did sort of portray, generally for the just energy transition, a good case where PPIB sort of also led the discussions, but generally speaking, the debate remained a bit missing, and that's why we're calling this sort of roundtable a blind spot, because it also sort of speaks to a broader political and economic dynamic that is actually happening, and especially when we look at the countries in the global south, fossil fuel again does represent this, what we say, a paradox, which we're also sort of trying to address here, because it's again, it has a national resource, but and how the developing nations and the low fiscal space countries are going to ignore that, it's really challenging to see. But at the same time, the path must provide these nations with the financial and technical resources and support that is necessary to leapfrog towards the clean energy transition. I believe that is when Zainab's point around these structured financing mechanism that sort of comes in. Now, the second most important point we really need to deliberate today's discussion is the point that Zainab raised around the cost of externalities in a reliance on coal. Because definitely the environmental and societal sort of cost from the coal is increasing very rapidly, from the health impacts that I mentioned to transportation issues, degradation of the ecosystem, and all of this cost is eventually borne by the community. And the whole point is that these costs, these indirect costs of the external costs, are not eventually reflected within the tariff structures that we have, particularly talking about Pakistan. There's no, again, the carbon pricing is not there. So what it does eventually is that these externalities sort of highlights a very false economy for coal. So whether it doesn't might appear as a cheaper energy source, its broader impacts propose a very sort of a burden on public economy. So let's not sort of forget the human cost of the inaction that we actually have over here today. So that was a bit of the scene setting, but at COP29, one of the very interesting developments that happened was actually the report launched by Powering Past Coal Alliance on accelerating coal to clean energy transition. So let me come to Ms. Julia, who's currently the head of Secretariat at PPCA. Ms. Julia, thank you so much for joining us. I believe in the report you highlighted the need for innovative financing mechanisms to support the transition away from coal, particularly in reducing the emissions. So could you perhaps briefly elaborate on what financing sources and mechanisms you think are most effective in helping countries such as Pakistan to reduce emissions from their coal-fired power plants? Yes, with this, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for giving us an opportunity to talk a little bit about the report and the work of the Coal Transition Commission. So maybe just to start with a little bit of background. So the report was produced by the Coal Transition Commission, which has been a commission which has been co-chaired by the governments of France and Indonesia over the last year. It was created at COP28. And the idea of the commission is very much that we need to bring together advanced and emerging economies, public finance and private finance, to think about how do we increase support for transitions out of coal. And why is that? We've already gone over a number of the reasons, but we need to phase out coal if we're going to get on track for 1.5 degrees. The social cost of coal is enormous. The IMF has a great statistic: for every dollar that we invest in phasing out coal, we make a $3 return in terms of social benefit. But at the same time, we recognize that the challenges of phasing out coal in emerging economies like Pakistan are considerable, but people, as Zainab mentioned, are locked into long-term power purchase agreements. There's a debt structure. These debts need to be repaid, but at the same time, we also need to be guaranteeing a secure energy supply, and we need to be making provisions for a just transition. And so there's a need for financial support for the coal transition. So over the course of a year, we've been working with governments from emerging economies, from advanced economies, and with private and public finance to think about what are some of the solutions. And the report sets out some recommendations as to what the next steps are. Your question was around what are the sources of finance. And in the report, we set out kind of very broadly what some of the sources of finance for coal transitions are, and a kind of series of examples of where these have been used. In a kind of very simple way, you could use public finance to support transitions out of coal. So for example, in Germany, they had reverse auctions to try and work out at what price coal power plant owners would be prepared to close them earlier. Private finance can be used to support transitions out of coal. So there's a great example in the Philippines of a coal power plant owner basically selling the coal power plant to a consortium which were able to access a lower cost of capital. And so on the basis of that, we're able to bring forward the retirement date of the coal power plant. And then it's possible to use blended finance, so a combination of the two, so ways of mixing public and private finance. The kind of drawbacks of these approaches, I think, are pretty obvious. So public finance is very expensive, especially for emerging economies. Are there really resources to compensate coal power plant owners? Is that the right use of precious public finance? And internationally, public finance is quite limited as well. Private finance, obviously, from that perspective, looks like a great alternative, and we're very much encouraging an increase of private finance into this space. But there are real costs involved in closing down coal power plants, and private finance wants to make a return. And so there are limits to the extent to which we can use private finance. Although I was really kind of encouraged to see a report from the World Economic Forum recently saying that they thought about 53% of coal power plants in the Asia Pacific region could be closed from a purely private investment by releveraging debts and looking for kind of ways to lower the cost of capital. But that leaves about 50% of coal power plants for whom that's not going to be suitable. And it's probably ones like some of the ones Zainab set out in Pakistan, where they're relatively young, very long PPAs, where the challenges are going to be particularly big. So blended finance looks like a great solution for some of these coal power plants. And there are great examples around the world of where this has been done. I'm sure that we've all been following the Cirebon transaction, not yet closed, but that's an example where the ADB is looking to use blended finance to close the power plant early. An example which has kind of finished is in Chile, where the IDB had a results-based loan which enabled them to close a couple of units of a coal power plant early there. But again, with blended finance, there is a challenge that public finance is scarce, and some of these mechanisms are kind of difficult to use as well. And so that's why in the report, we were also talking about using innovative financial mechanisms. And what we mean by an innovative financial mechanism is a new way of trying to find finance to cover the real costs of coal retirement. So the thing about public finance is basically it can cover the cost. It's not looking for a return. So what are other ways in which you can find finance to cover the costs? And I think two of the things that we were looking at were coal to clean credits, which have already been mentioned today. So that's a way of getting kind of money in by monetizing the social value of reducing carbon emissions. And so either sovereigns, so countries will pay through Article 6, or you could get private companies to be involved. And it looks like that is quite an exciting development in the area. Another possibility is debt for climate swaps as well, which is another way of trying to get kind of money in to cover the cost. And so perhaps one last thing before I finish, we kind of spoke in the report about the lack of finance, but I think another kind of key issue to surface is while we recognize there's a lack of finance, I think at the moment, probably the problem is that the finance available is underutilized. So there are less opportunities to invest than there are ETMs, CRMs, private finance looking to invest. And I think the kind of key issues here are around managing the risks that some of the investors see to investing, and also trying to create a bit more demand. There aren't that many owners of coal power plants who have come forward and saying, I want to think about closing my coal power plant early. And I think that there is one key thing that governments can do to help here. And I think that's about being really clear about the direction of travel. So whenever we spoke to MDBs, to private finance, the thing they made really clear is they see a big risk around investment if they're not certain that new coal won't be built in a country, or that there won't be a kind of commitment to the transition. And so one of the kind of key policy recommendations from a report is that governments need to be really clear that they have a commitment to not building new coal. And that will be perhaps the most important thing they can do to get investment flowing into the transition. The other thing which we can do to kind of support the flow of finance, I think, is to be encouraging coal power plant owners, to be encouraging kind of public utilities to be thinking about retiring early. And there, the Coal Transition Commission is really keen to be working with countries around the world, with governments around the world, to be thinking about how to prioritise coal power plants for retirement and what the right financial structures for each of these coal power plants might be. And so I see that already you've done a lot of work on this in Pakistan, but I'd very much invite you to encourage the Pakistani government to be participating in the work of the Coal Transition Commission, which will continue next year. And we'll be looking to find countries which want to kind of really take this work forward and want support to implement a program of coal power retirements.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Julia. Extremely useful interventions where you highlighted all the different sources from which this finance can be generated. We fully understand that you actually might need a bit earlier. So perhaps just one follow-up, very brief question, and if you want to sort of respond to it, you have highlighted again very importantly. I mean, from the government's perspective, and even what SGPI has been looking at different instruments, definitely Coal to Green Credit Initiative is something that's really important. But at the same time, another sort of structured, innovative financing mechanism that does come up is the JETPs, just energy transition partnerships, and we did see a bit of confusion going around the when it comes to sort of transactions. So if you have just very brief comment generally on the possibilities or feasibility of a JETP model for Pakistan, yeah, if you can just very briefly comment on that, and then we'll move ahead with the discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about the JETPs has been that they adopt a comprehensive approach. So they look at all aspects of the transition. Obviously, there's like what happens at the asset level, at the coal power plant level is important, but from a country perspective, equally important is where is alternative energy coming from? How are we maintaining low cost energy for consumers across the country? And how are we managing a just transition? And the advantage of the JETP is it looks at that holistically. I mean, I think that as I understand the policy discussions, it looks like there is a sense that a better model than the JETP going forward might be country platforms, and that would be a way in which kind of, so I suppose people felt that the drawback of the JETP was that there wasn't sufficient kind of driving from the country itself, that the kind of country government wasn't sufficiently involved in being able to kind of be clear about what their policy priorities were and how they were balancing some of these issues. And so the idea going forward is, I think that there'll be a country platform which will have national governments more in a driving role, will bring together international support and MDBs. And I think that's something definitely to think about. And I know that the Asian Development Bank has previously been relatively involved in Pakistan in thinking about how to manage a coal to clean transition.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julia. So I believe all points extremely well noted. Let me also sort of throw a similar question to Basit from Renewables First with us. Basit, so again, Julia has highlighted some of the important instruments that can again mobilize the finance, leading from public to the blended finance. So again, linking it a bit to the core. With the new climate finance goal of roughly 300 billion that we sort of agreed on, and then by 2035 is definitely insufficient. So again, talking from that perspective, what additional financing mechanisms could be introduced to be better support Pakistan and again transitioning away from coal? Definitely, that commitment has a very different nature, but just seeing that the global finance might not be definitely as easy unless the whole system is there. So, and how can the financing mechanism support Pakistan's energy transition to incorporate the external costs that we also talk about? If you can shed a bit of light on that, and if you want to also sort of respond to any of the points that Julia mentioned or Jenna mentioned in her earlier presentation. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Basil.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abed. And
Thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic. And it was great to hear Julia also mentioning about different public and private finance sources from which this could be in. Before I get into your exact question about where the finance could come from, I'll step back a little bit because I think what we internally in Pakistan has happened is we as a think tank and people working in this circle are a bit ahead of the curve as opposed to the government because Julia also mentioned you can't have finance flowing into the country if you don't have a proper coal phase out date, targets, moratorium established. In Pakistan, we do like to say that we have a coal moratorium, but it's an imported coal. So essentially, it's not a coal moratorium. So I think that's the stepping stone. That's the basic step for us to have the discussions going forward to kind of like first initially cement the moratorium on coal as a whole. Without that, you can't have and any transaction won't make any sense. So just wanted to start off with that. And I think we are still looking into the government, as mentioned by the Zainab, that government is still looking for repurposing, even though we already know, I mean, any of the technical experts working in the power sector know that this doesn't make any technical economic sense, specifically keeping in the context of the coal power projects, but still we are trying to look towards it. Having said that, so we need to align ourselves internally before we talk about the transactions actually taking place and getting the finance flows in. Having said that, I think the good news and a broader picture has been, yesterday about Pakistan's decision on non-proliferation treaty for coal. I think that's a very welcoming part. We'll have to see about how ambitious we are in taking that forward. And I think that's the first step for us to finally realize that, okay, we need to start thinking of phasing out at least. So now talking about the quantum and the sources, you talked about the COP and the $300 billion that has come through, the decision on that. I understand it's a bit discouraging to the global world, but we have to understand the problem more than the quantum is actually the access to the finance for Pakistan. We have seen that in climate financing as well. Their commitments for even that were available through the GCF and the other instruments, we haven't been able to completely get access to those kind of finance. So I think we have to look from the access point of view how we can get access to these kind of investments when it comes to the global climate commitments. Now, in terms of the options, I think you have laid down pretty much, about the ETM that's available. I think Pakistan has already done the ADP, has done the pre-feasibility, but somewhat, I mean, it's somewhere out in the shelves of some of the government departments. Not sure when it's going to be taken forward. You would have better idea on that. The JETPs, that's a model still in the conceiving stage, and then you have coal clean credits. But I think the most critical role for Pakistan is China. And all these other instruments are primarily led by for the ETM it's the ADB, the MDBs are backed by the West, if you can say, and the JETPs, and you have UK, France, and the other governments, and mostly the EUs. But here you have to realize that if you want to have a discussion on ground and have an implementability for the coal phase out, you have to bring in an initiative that is primarily backed by China. There haven't been any up till now, but there was announcement of Green Investment Partnership, GIFP, by China and the BRICS 1.5 years back. But again, that's a broader direction of China of going towards greening the BRI. It doesn't entail specifics about how that can be materialized. But I think that's where the critical opportunity is for Pakistan to kind of engage with China because uh, we are already doing the renegotiation parts of contracts and we are looking towards that, so might be more suitable to have a proper working on it how such kind of a facility could be established backed by China for phasing out these coal power plants because one thing that has changed over the past couple of years with the Chinese footprint going towards RE globally, they are looking towards how they can place themselves in the climate space and the climate diplomacy space as well. So I think we need to take advantage of that. Now, coming over towards mentioning about the phasing out, and how it can be done. Um, to be honest, I was just thinking through it before this webinar. We are actually doing the fossil fuel phase out. If you look into the PPA renegotiations, Ideally, that is exactly what you are doing. The problem is you are doing it in the wrong way. You are doing it in a way that impacts investors, impacts the country, it, have impacts on a lot of things. If only you could just realize that you could have done the same thing, structured it a little bit better, and get the finance flowing from the international sources, you could have gotten out of these contracts. Yes, it would have taken much more time, but you could have gotten out of these contracts and you could have essentially become a very successful case study. Because right now you are doing it. I mean, you renegotiate contracts with 15 IPPs. I mean, it's just a matter of whether you call it fossil phase out or just renegotiation of contracts. So I think that's something that we need to realize, that not just rely on these ETMs and JETPs, but locally, what are the instruments that are available? Some policy promises and things like that that we could essentially do it. Uh, Now, coming over towards one thing that we also should kept in mind when it comes to specifically the coal-fired power projects. As you mentioned in the earlier presentation, they have a smaller life. Sorry, they are very young. So you are talking about shaving their last 5 to 10 years of life. And one thing that we oftentimes, forget in the discussion is that these are commercial transactions, right? So you are talking about uh, getting the returns in. And right now, the situation of the power sector is such that, as in the initial presentation, you were talking about how the underutilization is at 50%, but for the last fiscal year, I know it's less than 25% for some of the coal-fired power projects as well. So you're talking about power projects that are already, not making as per their initial business plans. So right now, I would say, fortunately, unfortunately, the environment couldn't be any more ideal to kind of initiate negotiations on that end, and presented not just as a, way to finish up your businesses, but also as a way to phase out of this, as way out of this current contracts where you're not able to kind of get complete returns. That happened. And one last thing I think I wanted to mention around, one thing that we need to do also to get this phase out discussion, because we're building a lot of I see a lot of transaction structures done by the ETM, then there by the GFDC, then there's also by the Christoph, he's been working on this, but the thing is that internally we have not been able to kind of bring that into our plans. So for instance, we have IGSEB, generation capacity expansion plan. Somehow that plan has an constraint set up in it that you have to run the plant for 50% dispatch. Not just don't do that constraint, just put it as an optimization problem into the plant. That's what they're supposed to do. So you need to start optimizing whether phase out makes sense or not. And trust me, it makes sense because it doesn't optimize any of these power plants. Anyways, and there are other ways to also support the phasing out. We'll have that, I think, in the subsequent question about the internalizing the cost of it. But yeah, that's pretty much some of my
Yeah,
points.
thank you. No, perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Basit, for highlighting. Uh, again, reflecting on different mechanisms that exist. And I'll take one point here and come to Miss Afia, especially the theme about the whole economics that we're actually discussing, because again, we all do understand the numbers are becoming much clearer. The economics is becoming much clearer and more open, in particularly in the last years, and thanks to again the efforts of so many stakeholders that here as well. But let me come to Ms. Afia Malik. Ms. Afia is currently working as a senior research economist at Pakistan Institute of Development and Economics, PIDE. So, Ms. Afia, thank you so much for joining us. So, again, taking lead from some of the economics that Basit has also mentioned, we do face challenges when we talk about shifting from coal power, especially given that the externalities that are not factored into the energy pricing. So, uh, we'll definitely listen a bit later from Dr. Majid about the livelihoods, but how we can make this transition economically viable while safeguarding some of the livelihoods as well. And secondly, in the context of phasing out coal power plants that we have been discussing, capacity payments are definitely uh, now seen as a financial lifeline for coal plants to sort of remain operational. So, how can Pakistan adjust its capacity payment mechanism to better align with the goals of reducing its emissions? and transitioning more towards clean energy. So thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Afia. With this, over to you. Thank you. And if you would also sort of like to shed upon any points that mentioned by Basit or Julia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ubaid. First of all, very comprehensive report presented by Zainab. Now, coming to your questions, the most common concern about phasing out coal is the transition and transitioning towards renewable energy is the requirement of high upfront cost. And the second specific concern specific to Pakistan is the excess installed capacity in the system. Not just this report also mentioned about, and you also mentioned in the question is about the externalities in the form of health and environmental benefits. These have not factored in energy prices, but the one factor which we almost ignore is the trillions which are spent annually on subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, including coal. And these subsidies are not just explicitly which are accounted for in the pricing structure. There are some implicit subsidies which are not accounted for in the electricity prices. So these must also be considered when we talk about this transitioning. As I said, that the high upfront costs are required to transition towards renewables, but first of all, renewables have become cheaper. And also by the UN estimates that by 2030, 99% of the new renewables will be cheaper than the existing coal power plants. So much less will be required to transition to renewables as compared to subsidies going to the coal industry, explicitly and implicitly. Besides, there is substantial empirical evidence which shows that this transition's economic benefits would be far higher than the cost when considering externalities, as well as these explicit and implicit subsidies. And the benefits of ending coal use, including reducing climate change damage and improving public health, etc. There are lots of benefits. For instance, there is another study by IMF which says that the net gain of there will be a net gain of nearly 78 trillion US dollars by the end of this century, which is about 1.2% of annual global GDP. So phasing out not just coal will lead to decrease in carbon emissions, it will mitigate the infrastructure damage caused by climate change, while investment in renewables will enhance growth as well as spark innovation in the industry. As far as the livelihood is concerned, the coal industry employment opportunities can easily be replaced with jobs created by investment in the renewable power plants. And the evidence also suggests, the global evidence suggests that renewables can create 3 times more jobs than the fossil fuel industry, including the coal power plants or the coal industry. Let me quote here another study by IEA, which says that the 5 million jobs in the coal industry will be replaced by almost 14 million new jobs. 5 million jobs will be replaced by 14 million new jobs with the introduction of clean energy after transitioning to the clean energy sources. So there will be a net gain. Yes, the upfront cost can be a daunting task for many countries, including Pakistan, due to limited financial resources, as investments have already been made in the coal power plants. And you also mentioned in the report, Zainab also mentioned in the report, that there are technical support is also required, not just the financial, but also the technical support is required to make this transition to happen. But when we talk about the overall scenario and we talk when we take this in the long-term perspective, all these costs will pay off through this transition. Yes, incentives or structure of these investments, how to make these investment and what type of investment incentives can be provided, this is debatable. But definitely this transition is the only way to go for a sustainable future. For Pakistan as well as for the other developing countries. Moreover, efficient, reliable, renewable energy technologies can create a system less prone to market price shocks and improve resilience and energy security by diversifying the power supply options. Furthermore, in Pakistan, when we say there is excess installed capacity, on one side there is excess installed capacity, but on the other side there is a significant proportion of population which has no access, zero to limited access to a clean energy sources. So there is ample opportunities to scale renewables. Our grid is already struggling due to financial and operational inefficiencies. So it is not possible to expand the grid and connect more people who are relying on non-commercial energy sources or on costly polluting fuels. Therefore, investments in renewables will definitely pay off in the long run. Not only it will create more job opportunities, but it will enhance growth and it will pay off in the overall country's perspective. Now, coming to your second question, which is the most tricky part for in the context of Pakistan. Yes, renewables is the way to go for future. In the case of Pakistan, we cannot deny the fact that all coal-based power plants are commissioned under CPEC umbrella, which Zainab also mentioned in the presentation. They are all with long-term contracts with government guarantees. Phasing them out in the contract period is not economically feasible for Pakistan, given the already precarious investment climate and overall economic conditions. It is not advisable to restructure the capacity payment model or renegotiate long-term contracts unless the other party, that is China, is willing to renegotiate those contracts. Reprofiling of debt can be done to delay the impact of capacity payments, but it is also not a sustainable solution because it will only prolong the period. Otherwise, these capacity payments and these long-term contracts will remain there. Basit mentioned about that some sort of renegotiation is taking place, but let me mention here, these renegotiations are with the power plants which were commissioned under the 1994, 2002 and 2006 policy. And most of these plants, not most, in fact, all of these plants, the debt part of all these plants have already been paid off. So they don't have much stakes. So they are ready to renegotiate. That's why these negotiations are taking place and some of them are also successful as well. So we must take this, when we talk about renegotiation, we must take this into account that these CPEC power plants, they have 30 years, they are of 30 years period, and most of them, as also mentioned by Zainab in her presentation, the debt part is remaining. So it is not as easy unless China is willing to renegotiate these contexts. While at the same time, when we are using coal power plants, there are ways to reduce the environmental impact of these plants by adopting some technologies, as the world is doing, to mitigate the coal burning emissions, like for instance, coal cleaning by washing, electrostatic precipitators and fabric filters to remove or reduce ash and sulfur dioxide, etc. Likewise, there are dry handling methods of coal combustion waste, such as fly ash, eliminate the ecological risks associated with service improvements. Similarly, recycling of coal combustion waste in cement, concrete products, and construction. Coal combustion waste can be used in cement, concrete products, and construction fields. So some sort of recycling can be done to reduce the impact of environmental impact. It is also true that we entered into the coal business when the developed world has fully exploited the coal, but we can use coal up to a certain acceptable limit. We must have to complement it with clean indigenous energy resources like solar, wind, hydro, as well as nuclear, which is a clean energy option. And Pakistan also has the option. So we must need to move towards a diversified energy mix. But as also IGCEP is also going towards the clean, more towards the clean energy sources. So the more we move towards the cleaner energy sources, the more it will be easier for us to transition away from coal. Finally, shifting to local coal requires more investment. In other words, which also Zainab also mentioned about, there are plans to shift from imported coal to local coal, but it is also not economically viable. It will mean more investment, more capacity payment. Therefore, it is not a viable option. The best option is to increase or to scale the renewable share in our overall energy mix. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Afia, for highlighting initially the challenges and taking lead from that to going towards the solutions and the key pointers that you mentioned around the economics and what are the key factors that can be again incorporated over there. So thank you so much for highlighting. Those will later come to you with uh, a bit later on the some of the recommendations points that we'll be looking at, but you've already highlighted those as well. So let me take this opportunity to come to Ms. Selina Irfan. Ms. Selina, you have also been sort of working with the planning departments, with the energy experts for long. So, I mean, in your expertise as an energy planning experts, what do you believe the components that should be included in Pakistan's integrated energy plan to ensure a smooth shift from coal to renewables while maintaining the whole energy security and affordability that we actually talk about? And how can Pakistan design energy policies that account for externalities of coal use that we have been talking about? Ms. Afia mentions, and I mentioned those as well. I mean, the health costs are there, environmental degradation is there, and without imposing any undue economic hardships on the people that eventually have to bear the cost of this increased prices. So, Ms. Selina, with this, over to you.
Thank you, Beth. I'm just going to start with this. Yes, I mean, as Zainab had mentioned, that we have been always slow in following the world trend. We've always been a decade behind where the world has moved. But also, given our own energy crisis and our own high energy costs, which are non-affordable anymore, for our population, and given our economic development and economic growth crisis, we cannot rule out our indigenous resource altogether. So, and we are stuck in, agreements that we cannot, it would be ideal that we can rework them, but I don't think, if you look at the reality, we are curtailed by those agreements which are sovereignly guaranteed. So we are going to have to work around them right now. Also, given that we are looking at Europe and we're looking at developed countries, but we should also look at the East European countries, which have tried to reduce their reliance on coal and have seen about 15 to 20% increase in energy prices. In just 2023, their prices have gone up. I can give you an example. For example, with Poland, between Germany and Poland, there was a price difference of almost 40% between the price increases with the coal shut off. And so that is something that I think Pakistan cannot afford. While Europe has moved towards LNG to substitute its coal needs, shut off, replace as a substitute while it is increasing its renewable energy. We also do not have the financial, sort of stability right now in the economic crisis and in the economic current scenario to be able to do that. So we have to look at our indigenous resources. And there are ways to do it, which we call green coal mining. There are climate technologies, which is, which range from clean coal by washing, electrostatic precipitators, flue gas desulfurization. These are all ways of bringing, low NOx burners. These are all technologies that can be invested into for our local coal when we are sort of moving from imported coal to local coal. But I also agree with Basit that we need to change the IGCEP also towards optimization of these resources, instead of, so that we're using them now instead of waiting for them to, come on board at a later stage. These are 2-3 points of mine. And then lastly, the high upfront costs will always be a huge issue for us, given our constraints. So I think while we are looking at options for using the mechanisms for retirement, we have to look at these mechanisms in a long-term scenario. But we also have to look at the short-term and medium-term scenario. We can't ignore the short-term and medium-term scenario. So if we are going to start doing integrated planning, we have to do it in 3 phases. And the short-term and medium-term phase, we will be using coal. So we have to look at our emissions, we have to look at technologies, we have to look at investment to reduce our emissions, reduce the health and water waste from these emissions. And yes, in the long term, we start working on bringing these mechanisms and start making a plan for these retirements. So I'm not taking the retirement part out. We will eventually have to retire. We will have to move towards more renewable in the long term. We have the problem of capacity of bringing these renewables onto our grid. So we have to sort of replan our grid systems, and we have to look at distributed generation systems in urbanizations now, planning. So given all of these scenarios, we all know that our transmission is limited as compared to our installed capacity. Your installed capacity includes a lot of renewable projects. It includes these coal projects, but we are limited by our transmission. So all of these factors have to sort of be taken in and not taken in isolation. And so when we talk about integrated planning, it means that in the short run, we have to use these coal plants, and we have to sort of look at mechanisms to reduce our emissions in the short run. But in the long run, yes, we have to make a retirement plan for them also. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Selena. Definitely the points around how this phase transition should happen, extremely well noted. So with this, let me come to Dr. Majid Bilal from the Just Energy Transition Industry Consortium. If Dr. Majid, if you would like to sort of also, at the end of your points, if you'd like to sort of share upon the points mentioned by Ms. Selena. But when we talk about the concept of a just energy transition, it is critical for ensuring that the vulnerable communities, particularly those dependent on coal-based industries, are not left behind. So what key principles can Pakistan incorporate into its framework to ensure that these coal-dependent communities are not left behind in the shift to uh, just energy shift that we're talking about? And how should Pakistan design a just energy transition framework that addresses displacement of coal workers and ensures the equitable distribution of benefits from the renewable energy investment? Because I believe at some point what Ms. Reena also mentioned relates to this, that again, how do we actually make this transition more just as well? So with this, over to you, Dr. Majid.
Thank you, Bad, and thank you, Zana, for a very good presentation. Before I answer your question, I would just like to mention that this is not the first energy transition that is happening in our history. We've had energy transition in the past, but for this to be a just energy transition, the shift from fossils to RE must ensure that no one is left behind. That means we must address the social, economic, and environmental impacts of this transition on the workers, on the communities, and on the regions that are dependent on these fossils in general and coal in particular. Now, coming to your question, so before I get into the principles, I would like to say, first and foremost, we need to make sure that any framework that is produced is not produced in a silo, because that is a problem we've seen in the past, where we have come up with various frameworks, various documents, but it appears that those are produced in silos and there is no correlation between different documents. So that needs to be avoided. Now, coming to key principles, I have tried to jot them down to around 5 key principles, keeping in mind the time constraint as well. So first and foremost, I think we need to have good stakeholder engagement. where we engage with communities, we engage with local labor unions, and we communicate or engage the local policymakers, local governments, and they must be involved both in the planning and in the decision-making phase moving forward. Secondly, for communities, we need to have some measure of social protection in place for this transition to take place. This could include something like a pension scheme or unemployment benefits, whether it be short-term, long-term, that depends on the planning. And at the same time, because with this transition, we are expecting, as was earlier mentioned both by Julia and Ms. Afia, that with RE, we are likely to create 3 times as many jobs as compared to coal-based projects. But just the creation of jobs is not enough. We need to train our workforce from these communities, from these regions, to be able to take up these jobs. For this, we need both to improve our curriculum, educate the communities. We need to have skill development or reskilling of already existing workers. And we need to diversify the community environments. That could be with the promotion of small-scale enterprises or industries to create localized jobs. A problem we've seen in the transition in Europe was community ownership, particularly of wind power projects, but of both wind and solar. And they use a very innovative approach that I think we in Pakistan need to follow as well. That is to promote community ownership of these projects. You work on revenue sharing models with the communities, where the community reaps the benefits of these various RE-based projects. It is important to note that about 50% of Pakistan's population is women, roughly. So our transition needs to be a gender transition as well. And a very interesting stat that I came up with was that if we add about 10% of women in our workforce, that leads to 30% economic growth. Now, if you increase that number to 30% of women in a workforce, that leads to around 60% economic growth. And we need to take advantage of this and need to make sure that both women and the youth, since a large portion of our population coming up is generally the youth of the country, are engaged in this transition. They are catered for in this transition. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen great policies being produced in the past, but without proper implementation, we are not going anywhere. I would like to give here an example of JPCL, or Jamshoro coal power plant, that was funded by ADB, that is going to be coming online within the month. And even though they had wonderful frameworks or documents available for community protection, on the ground, we do not see these being implemented, or community concerns have risen around Jamshoro and its coal power plant. So that is something we need to avoid, and we can do this by robust monitoring of our framework, and this monitoring must be data-driven. Earlier, there was discussion around coal, as mentioned by Selina, that coal needs to be kept in our system, short-term or medium-term, and long-term we try to go towards phase-out. I actually would have a slightly different opinion. Not a different opinion, but an additional statement of sorts, that yes, this phase-out cannot happen in a day, but our timeline has to be very definitive. we need to define what short-term means. We need to define what medium-term means. And we need to cater for the impacts of the global carbon taxes being in place. At the moment, we are going to be facing the carbon tax, I think, starting next year from Europe, and this is only going to expand. So if we keep our grid, our production of electricity, coal-based or carbon-based, it is going to ruin our industry, which will lead to joblessness, which will inadvertently reduce the power of these communities to purchase electricity. And this is something we want to avoid. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Majid, for presenting opportunities and how the just transition should look like. Also, for highlighting how the this integration plan should look like in different sort of time zones. Extremely well noted points. Let me again, when talking about this transition, the technological role also sort of starts coming up, because when we're talking about financing, and so let me come to Dr. Majid Ali from USPK's National University of Science and Technology, NUS, and with an academic perspective as well. So, Dr. Majid, we believe that NUS has done some wonderful studies around technologies that revolve around coal. So, with the increasing adoption of, we have heard a lot about the solar rush that is happening these days. So, what impact do you predict on the coal industry, particularly in terms of reduced coal power generation, and what role do, more importantly, perhaps technological innovations play? I believe Ms. Afia also sort of highlighted a couple of technologies that can be used in mitigating the negative environmental externalities of coal, but at the same time, talking a bit about economics as well. So, are there any specific technologies or practices that show promise in reducing the social and environmental impacts, and based on that we can perhaps also reduce the external cost of the these coal-based energy as well, or fossil fuel-based energy as well? So with this, over to you, Dr. Martin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Beth, for inviting me on this important forum to talk about this important issue. So before going to address the technological innovations, I just want to highlight a few things which we are actually having in due to the solar adoption, what is happening in the coal sector progress. So currently, just Zainab has mentioned that we have a total installed capacity is around 3,960 megawatt, which is in which coal energy mix share is 16%, while solar is around 1.5% share. So if we can talk, there is a solar energy. There's a rapid growth in solar energy adoptions in the last couple of years. We have seen that because of their rising electricity price, which have surged around 155% from the last 3 years. So according to the Renewable First report, they have mentioned that we have imported around solar panels of 13 gigawatt worth of $2.1 billion this year. So due to this, there is a rapid change in the electricity prices in the government scale. So there are before that there are two major sectors involved in Pakistan. One is the consumer side, which is based on the electricity, and the second one is the industrial sector. So if we talk about the NEPRA merit list, the local coal which are based on thermal coal, which are actually they are actually the highest order. So I think in next couple of years, I think and that's what Ms. Afia has mentioned about the phase out is very difficult, because they are very cheaper as compared to the other. But the good thing is happening is in Pakistan Energy is that the government start negotiating with the independent power producers. So there is a good news. There are 5 independent producers. They have terminated the contracts, and they're mentioning that around 60 billion rupees they can save annually, and it can cut short the financial strain on the electricity consumers. So this is one of the most important things happening inside the energy market. So let's come to the, you're talking about the technological innovations plan. So there are several ways
to use the coal more cleanly way, which can reduce its environmental impact. So in clean coal technologies, there are two ways to clean the. First one is there in Pakistan. There are actually all are fire-based coal power plants. On the other way, we can use this coal to convert into liquid by using the fission top synthesis method. And in the second way, we can convert the coal to gas, which is producing a synthetic gas to use for the energy generations, and it can burn cleaner than the raw coal and can be used to power generation, or as we can use the chemical feedstock. Another thing is that we can use the supercritical and ultracritical power plants, which can operate at high pressure and temperature, improving the combustion efficiency, and which can reduce the emissions. But the problem is that we have to pre-treat, because our coal, coal is dirty, so we have to pre-treat the coal before we have to process to use these power plants. Additionally, we can use the biomass with them, and we can burn together in the power plants to reduce emissions as well. And finally, we can another way is we can use the coal ash as a byproduct of the combustion, can be repurposed in construction materials like concrete and cement. So if we could talk about, there are other ways in local existing power plants. What we can do is that we have to install the flue gas desulfurization systems, which can remove sulfur dioxide, which actually contributes to acid rain and smog, while selective catalytic reductions can also be used for the reduction of the NOxes, which can have breathing and respiratory problems, while the ESPs, which are electrostatic precipitators, can be used to remove the particulates, which can cause the lungs problems. So from the existing plants, we have to see how much emissions they are emitting, and we have to reduce the levels of the emissions by using and incorporating these equipments. And the second way, we have to explore the new technologies, like from the coal to liquid and coal to gas phase, where we can use the power generations, and as for the can use this technology for the chemical feedstock and for use for the fertilizer industry. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Majid, for highlighting the technological options that can be used. And I believe Faisal Sensab, does it answer your question? We'll take him shortly. Thank you for raising your hand. We'll be taking it shortly. But let us come to the colleague we have from the government, Mr. Irfan Pervez. So Irfan Sahab, you have been listening to the discussion that is happening since the start, leading from the perspective presented by PPCA to many of our experts from the Renewables First, by this consortium, USP case, and the presentation of Zainab herself. How do you see this whole transition actually happening? Because at the same time, we all do understand that I mean, the government also has to, just like Selina talked about, they had to look at the energy security perspective as well. So perhaps if you can highlight what you believe could be the key policy drivers needed to incentivize a shift from the fossil fuels, particularly from coal to renewable energy sources in Pakistan, and how can the government ensure an orderly transition without economic setbacks? Because that is again really important. Secondly, the pricing mechanism for coal, if you have anything to add on that, that doesn't seem to account for the environmental and social costs. So how do you think these can be incorporated or addressed? So with this, over to you, Irfan Sahab. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Sure. Thank you, Ubaid, for inviting me, and Mr. Zainab for giving the presentation on this. On government perspective, currently the government is thinking about to early retirement of these coal power plants and shift towards the renewables. It's under discussion at different forums. So recently, I have worked with your team as well regarding the concern raised from the higher up from the government as well. So if we talk about the transition from coal towards the renewable, in Pakistan, there are different entities that are dealing with the early retirement of coal power plants, financial mechanisms, as you mentioned earlier, ETM, Energy Transition Mechanism, JETPs Act, and CCCI
Rockefeller Foundation as well, that are dealing in energy transition projects as well. If we talk about the Pakistan, ADB also initiated a pre-feasibility study for Pakistan, and initial ranking for thermal power plants was discussed with relevant stakeholders. However, in 2022, the government has been changed, and due to that reason, the project has been stopped. Currently, we are again working on this scenario as well. But if we talk about the coal power plants, specifically the projects, CPEC projects, if we talk about the CPEC projects, there is a huge cost uh, that the government pay back to the project company if government gets early retirement to this plant. Like if we talk about the Saiwal coal power plant, it will be the estimated cost will be around $1.6 billion. That is the immediate retirement of plant. And for instance, cost drops to 398 to 628 millions if the retirement occurs post debt servicing. So this is the difference. So monetizing carbon reductions through high integrity transition credits could offset around 30 to 50% of these costs additionally, and again the blended financing or concessional financing uh, for climate swaps could reduce retirement costs by 20-30%. These are some of the financial figures which we analyze from different organizations like STPI and with the Renewable First and different other donor agencies like ADB. If we talk about the early retirement of these plants, first of all, we don't have any transition framework in Pakistan right now that uh, we need a comprehensive energy transition framework that is essential for Pakistan to navigate the challenges of early coal retirement. This for that framework, we get the clear roadmap for phasing out coal-fired power plants and replacing them with the renewables. Because if we displace the coal power plant with the renewable, there is a huge cost that the government should pay to the uh, investor as well. And after that, uh, pay, after paid to the investor, then government get the again financing, green financing or soft loan to install the renewables. And for early retirement, the government only get the uh, early carbon offsets, which is around 30 to 50% of the uh, decommissioning cost of the project. So there are also some environmental impacts of these coal power plants, coal power plants contribute over 40 million tons of CO2 annually, accelerating Pakistan carbon footprints as well. And also, recently we see that there is a huge increase in the net metering in the domestic installations of solar systems in our system, the which incorporate around 3.5 gigawatt in our system right now. So government also plans to explore and pursue avenues to finance cost-effective decarbonization pathways and initiatives for ESG-based financing, debt nature swap, green bonds, and climate funds.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Irfan Saab, for highlighting the government perspective. It's interesting to see the initiatives the government's also sort of trying to analyze. Yeah, and we fully understand the points that you mentioned about the importance and the very high cost that is associated with the transition that we're talking about. So yeah, we all do understand and believe in many of the even the models that STPI has and the models that AFUN which first also worked on, we definitely don't really have the feasibility in going for a very short term retirement. So definitely that acknowledgement or that information is really there. But again, with the CCCI mechanisms, we do need to see how we analyze that. So let me just firstly, before coming to the questions in just a couple of times, let me quickly check from our panelists if they have any response to the points that have been mentioned by Irfan Pervez Saab and the sort of the PPIP perspective that has been given. If anyone wants to sort of add on to any of these points, or if you want to respond to any of the points that any of our other panelists have mentioned. Yeah. Yes, Bhagat, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ved. So first of all, I completely agree with Irfan Saab. I think the idea of having a comprehensive energy transition framework, I mean, that's the need of an hour. And I think if there's, any such initiative by the PPIP or any government department, we'd be more than happy. I know SDPI and Renewables First to support in any way. And I think that kind of should encompass what the phase out could look like, and that could be the starting point from the government plans, what the phase out could look like. I just wanted to mention a couple of things because I think for our viewers as well, when we're talking about the retirement specifically for these coal-fired power projects, I completely agree with Selena. We're talking about in the longer term. So you're talking about shaving off past last 5 to 10 years of these projects. So which means like the earliest plant that you can retire the Sahiwal, it's going to get retired like in 2033. So you're talking about a big span time. However, that being said, there's a lot of things that needs to happen. First of all, all these energy transition frameworks and mechanisms, they have a big leading time to conceptualize, to ideation, and then to actually materialize a range for financing. Secondly, when you're talking about phase out, you have to, of course, strengthen your grid and replace it by the alternative sources. And that also requires a lot of, pre-planning. So you can't have discussions on retirement or even the decision on retirement 2 years or 3 years before the retirement will actually occur in most of the cases, specifically for these coal. So you see, if you're talking about retirement, you have to take into account the initial 6 and 7 years that needs to talk about. Secondly, I think we do have one thing I think that's often misconceptualized, and the early retirement is it's often taken as a transaction that is forced on the power generator. It's not even the ETMs in Indonesia, wherever they are taking place, it's a negotiation. It's a commercially bankable solution where the investors and the owners are getting returns, and that's why I completely agree that you're not talking about retiring during the times where you have debt tenor going on for any power plant. Having said that, we do have to realize that you're already doing the renegotiation. So it's just that you're doing it in a better way, in a more concerted way, and you can get mobilize a lot of international capital to do that. So there's a win-win situation here. It's just that you have to jump in early. I do wanted to point out, I don't know if I have time, about the externalities of the cost,
Sure,
because
please do.
you asked
Please
a,
do.
yeah, you asked a question about that, because I was working on it and I was thinking through how we can internalize that cost within our system, and I was going through some of the frameworks that were developed by China. So there's a framework developed by Energy Foundation China, which is often used within different provinces in China in the electricity market around internalizing the social and the environmental cost. And they actually decided about $28 per ton is the figure that they actually did it for China. Of course, it's going to be different for Pakistan, keeping into local context, but I was just running through some numbers, what it means for Pakistan. Based on the estimates of going 2030, about 50 million metric tons of coal. What does it mean? So that's equivalent to 1.4 billion US dollars annually that you are essentially costing against these environmental social costs. Just a rough numbers. We have to do a lot deeper dive into that. But to get into context, that's like a one tranche of IMF perhaps. So no need to go to IMF, and you can just internalize and get this cost from the generators. It's also, I think, perhaps a little bit less than what Irfan Saab mentioned on the immediate retirement of Saibal coal power plant. So I'm just saying that if you internalize these numbers, probably, even in the local coal power plants, which was mentioned that they make at the top of the EMO, they won't be at the top of the EMO if you internalize this cost, because you are not adding a cost, you're just shifting it from the public sector spending on the health and the other issues towards these generators who are truly responsible for that cost. So just wanted to mention a couple of points. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Basit, for highlighting both of the points. Let me check if any of our other panelists wants to respond to anything.
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
going to
Ms.
agree with
Selena, please go
Basit.
ahead.
I'm going to agree with Basit on this, that what we've not considered is, again, the fact that, again, we are going to be we'll have to internalize these costs. And when we internalize these costs, we're shifting cost from, given that we have a limited amount of spending, we are an economy which is on loans, we are going to have to shift it away from other sectors. So this is something that we have to consider very carefully. And like Basit has said, this is a long-term framework. We have to look at a long-term planning. But at the same time, I'm going to add that in the short term and medium term, even if you are utilizing these for the life cycle that they are already being put up, because you already have these coal plants set up and you are going to be utilizing them, you will have to sort of look at the increasing cost of this to the communities and the emissions. We're already looking at the cost of air quality, the economic cost of air quality in Lahore or in other cities of this country. We've gone into shutdowns, literally. We don't want to repeat that mistake also by using the coal. So we will have to look at investment mechanisms with ADB, World Bank, and other donors for technology investment for the tenure that we are going to be using them, while we explore the mechanism for the retirement plan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Selena. Basit, if do you have any, do you want to add anything? I mean, sounds
No, I completely agree
Yeah.
agree with that report.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. So let me come to Zainab. Zainab, there's a question on the capacity charges, where Mimuna has asked that why do local coal projects have high capacity charges compared to those using imported coal? If you can please respond to that. Yeah.
Okay, so basically there are a number of underlying factors for this high cost of capacity charges for local coal plants. Firstly, as I've mentioned in my presentation, that the local coal is comparatively less efficient than the imported coal. That means we need to burn more coal to, generate same amount of electricity. So this is one of the main input, and that is the lower efficiency rate. Then we have the cost of working capital, which is high for local coal. Then the high operation and management maintenance cost, and then the interest rate. These all the components add up and add to the capacity charges of local coal, which eventually makes it higher than the imported coal. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Zainab. If any of our attendees either joining us through different social media platforms, if you have any questions, please do drop them in the comment section. Or if any of our speakers wants to highlight any of the final recommendations or points from therein, please let us know. So I believe it has been, I mean, coming to Cape Town, it has been again very interactive discussion, and thanks to Zainab for her presentation. We'll be launching the study today, and even after that, we do have, and Masood was really right, that will later be updating, providing its updated version. Will update some of the figures that are currently in the document, and we'll be sending it over. But I believe it has been a really interactive discussion, and especially taking lead from what has happened at COP. That's really going to be important how we move forward, because the things have started again making sense, and it's better that we have missed the bandwagon. I mean, the whole trends that have gone in the energy transition industry, and we are facing the cost of being a laggard. As really mentioned that eventually things are happening, but we really need to, if they happen in a more structured way using more mechanisms, we'll definitely be in a much better position from years onwards. But with this, let me come to Mr. Shakib Ilahi, who's currently a senior advisor at Sustainable Development Policy Institute, for his final concluding remarks and vote of thanks. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope I'm audible. I am. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this closure. It was a very interesting roundtable. I'm a recent convert to the need to address the issues on climate change. So I've always been on the other side of the fence, selling coal and selling energy. So for me, it's very enlightening to learn as to all that needs to be addressed and all that needs to be done, because to me it's a matter of survivability. It's I mean, with all the social cost and the impact cost and the environment cost that we can discuss and address, and the economic cost, it's a matter of survivability for the human race, for the country as a whole, for everyone to carry on. Very interesting discussion. Very very enthused panelists. All of you came from. All of you had good points to make, but I have to take a few points into consideration here. What Zainab said, that why are we following? Why aren't we leading? Or why aren't we in pace, at least with what is happening globally? Why can't we simply address the issue, take a stop, and decide that this is what we need to do and this is what we need to do to fix it? And the comment from Irfan Saab, in which he was very clear in saying that we need to have a transition policy. We need to have a structure in place whereby we can walk the talk. We can actually arrive at a decision. We have had interesting discussion on the possibilities, the issues, and the solutions, both from the tech side as well as from the commercial side. But let's put them all into place. With this, I would like to thank you all for a very interesting discussion, for a thought process. Zainab's report was fantastic, because she was actually able to put out figures and numbers. I do tend to disagree with a few points on the fact when it came to local coal as against imported coal as to why the cost is higher. Yes, the efficiency is questionable of lignite, but one must also understand the cost of the imported coal has continued to rise. The cost of freight has continued to rise, while the cost of domestic coal has been stagnant. So that particular issue should have been addressed by the decision makers, or should have been looked at by the decision makers. But having said that, it was a very well thought out report, very well structured report. So with that, and with all the ideas that were put on by Julia, the ideas that were put on by Dr. Majid of NUST, everything was fantastic. Thank you very much, and thank you all for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.